We're going to keep on learning with Sim Shalom, and what I want to look with you today is structurally, we sort of touched on this, but I wanted to look at some texts that touch on it directly. Structurally, what is Sim Shalom doing, especially as we've already had the end of the Amidah in Modim, where we have the parallel to the beginning and the bowing. And we looked earlier this week at the texts that identify Sim Shalom or Birkat Kohanim, I'm not totally clear which one, as the end of the ritual that you do when you offer a sacrifice. So now we're going to look a little bit further of, well, what does it mean to ask for shalom at the end of a ritual? This is a ritual, the sacrifices were a ritual, but what's the issue with shalom at the end of a ritual? And I want to draw on the research of Professor Uri Ehrlich, who not only did the work on the Geniza for the text that we often look at in this class that represent the old Eretz Yisrael minhag, the old Eretz Yisrael tradition that was discovered in the Geniza, but he also has a very sort of ritual lens to the prayer experience generally, and makes an argument that Sim Shalom is one of the ways that you would just say goodbye in the ancient world. That is to say, shalom, bidding shalom, asking for shalom, is part of the separation move that we're working on here at the end of the Amidah. And even if we finished our request and wrap that up with Modim, we have to somehow take our leave of God, and this is part of the taking leave ceremony. So let's take a look at some of these texts so you can see what I'm talking about on the inside. So the challenge is that we have this somewhat famous statement about the structure of the Amidah, in which we learn the following rule from Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says, a person should always ask for their needs. Notice it's in the singular here. Leolam al yishal adam. A person should not ask for their needs. Lo b'shalosh rishonot, lo b'shalosh achronot. Don't ask for your needs, not in the first three blessings, and not in the last three blessings. Yesterday we saw the first three and the last three are structurally always the same. You're not supposed to ask for your individual needs during those sections of Amidah. Rather, you should ask for your needs in the middle blessings. And then we're going to get an analogy here in a second, but just to highlight the problem, right? The problem is, it seems to me like we're asking for our needs also in the end three brachot, or at least two of the three brachot. In Ritzei, we're asking for God to accept our prayers. And in Sim Shalom, we're asking God to grant peace. So what does that mean? Now, you could solve that by saying, well, you could ask for communal needs at the end and not individual needs. And maybe that is sort of one solution. Individual needs are in the middle of the Amidah, but communal needs could also be at the end of the Amidah. But that's not exactly how the analogy that we're going to read sees the end brachot. So let's take a look at this analogy from Rabbi Chanina, who says, well, the first three blessings are like a servant who is ordering praise, shemisader shevach, Lifnei Rabbo, before his master, right? The first three, you might have heard this, first three are the praise brachot. You could make an argument that Tchiyat HaMeitim, blessing number 2, is actually a request for God to bring a redeemer, and bring a redeemer would be the first blessing, but also to revive the dead. Maybe that's a request, but maybe it's not explicit like it is in the end brachot. So the analogy is, it's the servant who's ordering praise. Let's say the first three are praise. Emtsayot, the middle blessings, are like a servant who is asking shemivakesh pras. Pras is like a prize; it's a cognate, but also probably means like prusa, like a slice of bread, some sort of food, not like a prize, like I won the lottery, but mivakesh, some basic need. I'm asking for some basic need from the master. That's what the middle blessings are. And then the last blessings, domei la'eved shekibel pras me'rabo. The last three blessings are like a servant who actually received what he asked for, he received that basic need, that slice of bread, and then takes his leave and goes away. Niftar v'holechlo. So I often was taught that the last three were thanks, todah. The truth is, the characterization of the last three brachot as thanks, which is just an expansion of Modim, which is only one of the last three brachot, really doesn't take shape until the Rambam, not until centuries after this text and Rabbi Chanina's analogy. What you see from the analogy is Rabbi Chanina saying the last three are about taking leave. You have what you asked for, whatever that means, and now you have to figure out a way to niftar v'holechlo, to take your leave and go away. And how do we do that from the presence of God? And so if we think about the last three blessings as that sort of stepping away from the presence of God, that might make more sense for how we understand what we're doing in Sim Shalom. Less of a request for national and not individual focused need of peace, which it also could be, but just structurally, it really is representing some form of beniftar v'holecho. I'm getting ready to take my leave of the presence of God. Let's take a look at another sort of famous text about the Amidah, but in the context of our bracha means something else. Rabbi Alexandri says in the name of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Hamid Palel, the one who praised the Amidah, Sarich Sheyafsiya, Shalosh Psiot Lachorav. A person who says the Amidah has to take 3 steps back. V'achar kach yitain shalom. And then after taking your 3 steps back, that's when you bid farewell, but literally give peace. Yitain shalom. So you see here the word shalom is functioning in describing the Amidah, is functioning as a bidding goodbye and not just a request. So there's something wrapped up at the end of the Amidah of you have to step away, niftar v'olechlo, you walk away from the presence of God, and yitain shalom, and you give your farewell, which is some expression of, I hope that you and I can experience peace. And that indeed is something that we see in a number of places where there is some sense of you back away after you receive your prusa, after you receive your piece of bread, and you give peace when you're leaving someone. So another source that talks about backing away after receiving what you were getting, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says, this is a question of which way are we supposed to orient ourselves in the Amidah. Let's be grateful to our ancestors who revealed to us makom tefillah, the place of prayer. As it's written in Nehemiah, Utzivah Hashamayim lecha mishtachavim. So the heavenly hosts, the celestial bodies are bowing down toward God. And then the Steinsaltz note here indicates that since we know that the celestial bodies move east to west during the day, so then they bow in that direction. They must bow towards the west. That's where God's presence must be, towards the west. But then Rav Acha Bar Yaakov says, no, actually, maybe the Tzva Hashamayim is not actually bowing towards God as they face God, but rather, Dilma ke'eved shenotel pras me'rabo. Here's our analogy again. Maybe they're like a servant who took the prize or the piece of bread from their master, and is walking backwards and bowing, right? So here you have sort of the bodily image of what it means to beniftar v'olechlo. You've got what you came for, and now you're going to back out of the presence of God, and you're not going to turn your back and walk away, but you're actually back. And that would indicate in the context of this sugya that God's presence is actually in the east and not in the west. And then the Gemara says, well, teku, we can't figure that out. So this actually doesn't help prove which way you're supposed to face. But we do get the analogy of, what happens when an Eved takes from their master? They walk backwards and bow. That's the way you take your leave. Let's take a look at the recitation of the word shalom as part of this niftar, part of this I'm backing away from you. We get a scene from the Simchat Be'er HaShoeva, from the great water celebration that we do on Sukkot with all the priestly and functionaries like sort of celebrating and singing, including the Leviim, who sort of have a band that they strike up during Simchat Be'er HaShoeva. And when it's time for everybody to go home, what happens? When it's time for everybody to depart, they would quote from the book of Psalm 128, Yivarechecha Adonai Mitzion, Urebetu Yerushalayim Kol Yemei Chayecha, Urevanim Levanecha Shalom Al Yisrael. They would actually say the verse that ends Shalom Al Yisrael. This was the verse that also starts Yivarechecha, kind of like our priestly blessing, and ends Shalom Al Yisrael. So there's there's a ceremony that we're sort of experiencing here of how do we take our leave from God and sort of reference the desire for peace as part of the stepping away from God. And this is something that we see in other texts as well, where when it's time to leave, you ask for a bracha, and the bracha is often focused on peace. So the idea here of Sim Shalom is that you have sort of the nitty-gritty problem of, wait a minute, I thought this was the thank you section of the Amidah, and this seems more like a request. And it is a request, and you could say, yeah, it's a communal request, and that's okay. But what I'm really arguing here, following Ehrlich, is no, it's actually the part of taking leave. How do we walk backwards from the experience of being in the presence of God? We're asking for peace as a way of yitain shalom, as a way of sort of ending this moment of relationship together and moving on to whatever we're going to next.